The rope burned against Cordelia's neck as she kicked frantically at the air beneath her feet. The crowd of Millbrook's finest citizens jeered below, their faces twisted with righteous fury. She had exactly 30 seconds before the trapdoor would swing open and send her dancing on air for a crime she didn't commit. "Stop this execution!" Sheriff Jasper Hawthorne's voice cracked like thunder across the town square, his spurs jingling as he vaulted onto the gallows platform. The hangman's hand froze on the lever, confusion flickering across his weathered face. "Sheriff, you're too." Late Mayor Cornelius wheezed from below, mopping sweat from his brow. "The trial's over. Justice must be served for the murder of Widow Patterson." Jasper's steel-gray eyes locked with Cordelia's amber ones, seeing terror and something else, a fierce intelligence that spoke of innocence. Her dark auburn hair whipped around her face as she struggled against the bonds. And he noticed her hands weren't calloused like a killer's would be, but soft and ink-stained like a schoolteacher's. "The hell it will," Jasper growled, drawing his Colt .45 in one fluid motion. The barrel gleamed in the harsh afternoon sun as he aimed it directly at the rope above Cordelia's head. "I've got new evidence that clears Miss Cordelia Fairweather of all charges." The crowd erupted in angry shouts, but Jasper's gun never wavered. He'd been sheriff of this dusty Colorado town for 8 years, and his reputation with a pistol was legendary. No one dared challenge him when his iron was drawn. "What evidence?" Mayor Cornelius demanded, his jowls quivering with indignation. "We found her standing over the body with blood on her dress." "Blood from trying to save the woman's life," Jasper replied coolly, never taking his eyes off Cordelia. "I just came from Doc Morrison's place." He examined the body again and found something we all missed: poison in her fingernails. Widow Patterson was murdered with strychnine, not the kitchen knife you all assumed. Cordelia's eyes widened with desperate hope as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jasper holstered his weapon and moved behind her, his calloused fingers working quickly at the knots binding her wrists. The moment she was free, she pulled the noose from her throat with trembling hands. "You saved my life," she whispered, her voice raw from the rope's pressure. Without hesitation, she reached beneath her torn bodice and withdrew a delicate silver locket on a thin chain. "This was my mother's. It's all I have left of her, but I want you to have it." Jasper stared at the offering, the afternoon light catching the intricate engravings on its surface. "Miss, I can't accept, please." "Ah!" Her fingers brushed his as she pressed the locket into his palm. "My mother always said it would protect the person who needed it most. Today, that's you." The warmth of her touch sent an unexpected jolt through his chest, and for a moment, the angry crowd faded away. All he could see was this brave woman who'd faced death with dignity and was now offering him her most precious possession. "Sheriff Hawthorne." Mayor Cornelius's voice shattered the moment. "If she's innocent, then who killed Widow Patterson? The real murderer is still out there." Jasper pocketed the locket, feeling its weight against his heart. "Then I guess I better find him before he strikes again." 3 days later, Cordelia sat in the cramped schoolhouse, trying to focus on lesson plans, while her mind wandered to the silver-eyed sheriff who'd saved her life. The children had been kind since her return, but their parents whispered behind, gloved hands whenever she passed. Innocent or not, the shadow of the gallows still clung to her reputation. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Jasper Hawthorne filled the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the late afternoon sun. He held his hat respectfully in his hands, and she noticed he'd cleaned up since the execution. His dark hair was combed back, and his shirt was pressed. "Miss Fairweather, I hope I'm not intruding." His voice was gentler than she remembered. From the gallows, lacking the commanding authority he'd displayed before the crowd. "Not at all, Sheriff." She set down her pen, acutely aware of how her pulse quickened at his presence. "Have you found anything about the real murderer?" Jasper stepped inside, his spurs clicking against the wooden floor. "That's what I wanted to discuss with you. I've been investigating everyone who had contact with Widow Patterson in her final days. Your name came up in her journal entries." Cordelia's breath caught. Her journal. "She wrote that you'd been bringing her meals and medicine for her arthritis. Said you were the only person in town who showed her kindness." His eyes softened. Mordecai Grimm had been pressuring her to sell her land to the railroad company, Mordecai. Cordelia frowned. I saw him arguing with her outside the general store last week. He seemed angry that she'd refused his offer. Jasper nodded grimly. Grimm stands to inherit everything now that she's gone. And guess who's been buying up railroad stock recently? He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. Found this in his hotel room. Purchase orders dated 2 days before the murder. The implications hit Cordelia like a physical blow. He killed his own aunt for money? Looks that way. But I need proof, not just suspicion. Jasper moved closer, and she caught the scent of leather and sage on his clothes. Problem is, Grimm's got half the town council in his pocket. They want this case closed with you as the scapegoat. Cordelia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Then what can we do? Jasper raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. This is dangerous work, Miss Fairweather. Grimm won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens his plans. He already tried to have me hanged for a crime I didn't commit, she replied, lifting her chin defiantly. I won't hide in this schoolhouse while he profits from murder. Something sparked in Jasper's eyes, admiration mixed with concern. You're braver than most men I know. Heat rose in her cheeks at the compliment. My mother always said courage. It was just fear walking forward. Jasper's hand moved unconsciously to his vest pocket where the locket rested. Smart woman? What else did she teach you? Sometimes the law isn't enough to ensure justice. Cordelia stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. Sometimes good people have to take matters into their own hands. Careful. Schoolteacher Jasper murmured, his voice dropping low. That kind of talk could get you in trouble. I'm already in trouble, Sheriff. The question is whether you're willing to help me get out of it. For a long moment, they stood in the fading light of the schoolhouse, the air between them charged with more than just shared purpose. Finally, Jasper nodded. All right, Miss Fairweather, but we do this my way, and you follow my lead. Agreed? She extended her hand like a man would to seal a business deal. When his large, calloused palm engulfed hers, she felt that same electric jolt from their first meeting. Partners, she said firmly. Partners, he agreed, though his grip lingered longer than strictly necessary. The Brass Lantern Saloon reeked of whiskey and unwashed bodies as Cordelia pushed through the batwing doors, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd traded her modest schoolteacher's dress for a low-cut scarlet gown borrowed from Pearl, the saloon's most popular working girl. The transformation was so complete that even she barely recognized herself in the mirror. Mordecai. Grimm sat at his usual corner table, gold teeth glinting as he laughed with 2 railroad executives. His beady eyes swept the room with predatory interest until they landed on her. She forced herself to sway her hips as she approached, channeling every ounce of feminine wiles she'd observed but never used. Well, Grimm drawled, his gaze lingering on her décolletage. Don't believe I've had the pleasure, darling. Ruby, she purred, sliding uninvited into the chair beside him. Ruby Diamond? I just arrived from Denver, looking for a gentleman who knows how to treat a lady right. From across the room, Jasper watched the performance with clenched fists, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to intervene. He'd positioned himself at the bar where he could observe while appearing to nurse his whiskey. The sight of other men ogling Cordelia made his blood boil, but he had to admit her acting was flawless. Denver, Grimm signaled the bartender for another bottle. Expensive city for a pretty little thing like you. What brings you to our humble town? Cordelia leaned closer, letting her finger trace the rim of his glass. Opportunity, sugar. I heard there's big money coming to Millbrook with the railroad expansion. A smart girl positions herself where the money flows. Grimm's eyes lit with greed and lust in equal measure. You heard right, sweetheart. I am about to close a deal that'll make me the richest man in 3 counties. He puffed out his chest like a preening rooster. Just acquired some prime real estate that the railroad desperately wants. How exciting. Cordelia gushed, refilling his glass with unsteady hands, a deliberate move that made whiskey splash onto his pants. Oh, how clumsy of me. She dabbed at his leg with her handkerchief, using the distraction to lean closer. You must be incredibly clever to pull off such a big business deal. Clever doesn't begin to cover it, Grimm boasted, his words slightly slurred. Sometimes, A man's got to take decisive action to secure his future. Can't let sentiment get in the way of progress. Cordelia's pulse quickened. He was getting close to confessing, but she needed more. Sentiment? My dear old Aunt Grim laughed bitterly. God rest her stubborn soul. Spent months trying to convince her to sell that worthless patch of dirt. She wouldn't listen to reason, kept going on about family legacy and all that nonsense. What? Changed her mind? Cordelia asked innocently, though her stomach churned at his casual callousness. Grim's eyes grew crafty. Let's just say she had a change of heart, permanently. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small glass vial, half empty and still containing traces of white powder. Amazing how a little medicine in her evening tea helped her see things my way. Cordelia's blood turned to ice as she stared at the evidence of murder in his palm. Across the room, Jasper had gone rigid, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. You poisoned your own aunt? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Horror overriding her act. Grim's expression shifted from boastful to dangerous. In an instant, his thick fingers clamped around her wrist like a vice. Who wants to know, schoolteacher? The game was up. Cordelia tried to pull away, but his grip tightened painfully. The saloon had gone quiet, conversations dying as patrons sensed trouble brewing. Let her go, Grim. Jasper's voice cut through the silence like a blade as he stepped away from the bar, his hand hovering over his holster. Grim yanked Cordelia against him, his other hand producing a derringer from his boot. The small gun pressed against her temple as he backed toward the rear exit. Sheriff Hawthorne, he sneered. Should have minded your own business. Now the pretty schoolteacher pays for your meddling. Confessed to murder in front of a dozen witnesses, Jasper said calmly, though his eyes blazed with fury. It's over. Nothing's over. Grim's voice cracked with desperation. I've got enough money to buy my way out of this territory, and I'm taking insurance with me. He dragged Cordelia toward the back door, but she wasn't going quietly. Drawing on every ounce of strength, she drove her elbow hard into his ribs and stomped on his instep with her heel. Grim howled and loosened, his grip just enough for her to break free. Cordelia dove behind an overturned table as Grim's derringer barked, the bullet splintering wood inches from her head. The saloon erupted in chaos as patrons scrambled for cover, chairs crashing and glass shattering in their panic to escape the gunfight. Jasper's Colt cleared leather faster than a striking snake, but Grim was already moving, using the confusion to slip through the back door into the alley. The sheriff vaulted over the bar in pursuit, his boots thundering against the wooden floor. Stay down, shouted to Cordelia as he reached the doorway. The alley behind the brass lantern was a maze of shadows and garbage, perfect for an ambush. Jasper pressed himself against the doorframe, listening for any sound that would give away Grim's position. The distant whinny of a horse told him the killer was making for the stable. Cordelia, can you hear me? He called over his shoulder. Fine, came her shaky reply. He dropped the poison vial when I elbowed him. I've got it. Relief flooded through Jasper, but he couldn't let his guard down yet. Grim was desperate now, and desperate men were the most dangerous kind. He sprinted down the alley, his spurs ringing against the packed dirt as he rounded the corner to the livery stable. The stable owner lay unconscious near the entrance, a trickle of blood running from his temple. Grim had already saddled a horse and was swinging into the saddle when Jasper burst through the doorway. End of the line, murderer? Grim wheeled his mount around, raising his derringer with a snarl of rage. Go to hell, Sheriff. Both guns fired. Simultaneously, Grim's shot went wide, but Jasper's bullet found its mark, punching through the killer's shoulder and spinning him from the saddle. Grim hit the ground hard, his weapon flying into the straw. Jasper approached cautiously, his Colt trained on the writhing man. It's over, Grim. You're going to hang for what you did to your aunt. She was a stubborn old bat, Grim gasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Wouldn't see reason about the railroad deal? I offered her a fair price. So you poisoned her. Tea and let an innocent woman nearly hang for it. Jasper's finger tightened on the trigger. You're lucky I'm a lawman, or I'd put you down like the rabid dog you are. Cordelia appeared in the stable doorway, still clutching the poison vial. She'd torn strips from her borrowed dress to bind a shallow cut on her arm where she'd scraped. Against broken glass? Despite everything she'd been through? Her amber eyes blazed with fierce satisfaction. The whole saloon heard him confess, she said breathlessly. Pearl and the other girls are rounding up witnesses as we speak. Jasper nodded, pulling iron shackles from his belt to secure the prisoner. Doc Morrison will want to examine this vial. Confirm it matches what he found in your aunt's system. As he hauled Grim to his feet, the wounded man let out a bitter laugh. You think this changes anything? I've got friends in high places, Sheriff. Money talks louder than justice. In this territory? Maybe, Jasper replied grimly. But murder's a federal crime when it involves defrauding a railroad company. I'll be turning you over to the U.S. Marshal when he arrives next week. The fight went out of Grim at those words. Federal justice couldn't be bought as easily as local courts, and he knew it. As they walked back toward the jail, Cordelia fell into step beside Jasper. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving her shaky and exhausted. Without thinking, he wrapped his free arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. You were incredible in there, he murmured against her hair. Braver than any deputy I've ever worked with. She looked up at him, seeing something new in his eyes. Not just admiration or gratitude, but something deeper and more dangerous. We made a good team. It's best, he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. They reached the jailhouse as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. As Jasper locked Grim in a cell, he noticed Cordelia touching the place where her mother's locket had once rested. The gesture was unconscious but telling. You regret giving it to me, he said quietly. She shook her head. No regrets, but I do. Miss it sometimes. Jasper reached into his vest pocket and withdrew the delicate silver locket, letting it catch the lamplight. Your mother was right about it protecting someone. It's been keeping me safe since the moment you gave it to me. How? His gray eyes met hers with startling intensity. Reminded me that some things are worth fighting for. 2 weeks later, Cordelia stood before the mirror in her small room above the schoolhouse, nervously adjusting the modest blue dress she'd chosen for the town's harvest dance. The scandal of her near execution had finally begun to fade, placed by gossip about Grim's trial and the railroad money that would soon transform Millbrook. She'd barely seen Jasper since the night they'd captured the killer. Been busy with paperwork for the federal marshal, testifying at preliminary hearings, and dealing with the influx of railroad officials who'd descended on the town. But every evening, she caught glimpses of him from her window as he made his rounds, and sometimes she could swear he looked up at her building with the same longing she felt. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Jasper standing in the hallway, looking devastatingly handsome in a black suit she'd never seen before. He'd shaved and combed his hair back with pomade, transforming himself from rugged lawman to dapper gentleman. Sheriff, she breathed, her pulse quickening at the sight of him. Jasper, he corrected gently, holding out his arm. Was hoping you might save a dance for me tonight. She placed her hand on his sleeve, marveling at how natural the gesture felt. I might have 1 or 2 available? They walked to the town hall in comfortable silence, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. The shared danger had forged a bond deeper than mere partnership or friendship, but neither had dared to name it yet. The harvest dance was in full swing when they arrived, the hall decorated with cornstalks and autumn leaves. The local fiddle band played a lively reel while couples spun around the floor in colorful whirls of fabric. Mayor Cornelius raised his glass when he spotted them, still trying to make amends for his role in the near execution. Sheriff, Miss Fairweather, come join the celebration. But Jasper only had eyes for Cordelia as he led her onto the dance floor. She fit perfectly in his arms as they began to waltz, her skirt swaying around his legs as they moved in perfect harmony. You clean up nicely, lawman, she teased, her hand warm against his shoulder. You're one to talk, he murmured, spinning her gracefully. Though I have to admit, I prefer you in school-teacher clothes over saloon girl attire. She laughed, remembering her performance at the Brass Lantern. That wasn't exactly my natural element. Thank God for that, he said fervently, then paused. As the music shifted to a slower melody, Cordelia, there's something I need to tell you. Her smile faded at his serious tone. What is it? The federal marshal offered me a job. U.S. Deputy Marshal, working the entire Colorado territory. It's good money, steady work, and a chance to make a real difference. She felt the bottom drop out of her world, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. That sounds like a wonderful opportunity. It would mean leaving Millbrook, leaving you. His gray eyes searched her face desperately. Unless... unless what? Jasper stopped dancing, right there in the middle of the crowded floor, and reached into his vest pocket. Instead of pulling out her mother's locket, as she expected, he withdrew a small velvet box. "Unless you'd consider coming with me, as my wife." Cordelia's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the lamplight like a star. Around them, other dancers began to slow and stare, but she barely noticed. "Jasper," she whispered. He dropped to one knee right there on the dance floor, causing a ripple of gasps and excited murmurs throughout the hall. "Cordelia Fairweather, you're the bravest, most intelligent, most beautiful woman I've ever known. I love your courage, your compassion, and the way you make me want to be a better man. Will you marry me?" Tears pricked at her eyes as she stared down at him, this strong, honorable man who'd saved her life and won her heart. The entire town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her answer. "Yes," she whispered, then louder so everyone could hear, "Yes, I'll marry you." The hall erupted in cheers as Jasper slipped the ring onto her finger and swept her into his arms. He spun her around as the crowd applauded, her laughter ringing out like music. When he finally set her down, he cupped her face in his hands. "Have something else for you," he said softly. Reaching into his other pocket, her mother's silver locket gleamed in his palm. But now it hung on a new chenna, delicate gold one that matched her engagement ring. "I had the jeweler add something," he explained, opening the locket to reveal two tiny photographs, one of her mother and one of him. "Oh, Jasper," she breathed, tears flowing freely now. He fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. "Your mother's locket brought us together. I want it to stay with you always, protecting the woman I love." 3 months later, Cordelia stood in the small chapel behind the Millbrook church, adjusting her wedding dress with trembling fingers. The gown had belonged to her mother, carefully preserved in lavender and tissue paper, cream-colored silk. Still fit perfectly, though she'd added her own touches. Her mother's pearl earrings and the silver locket that now held both their photographs. "You look radiant, dear." Mrs. Henderson, the minister's wife, fussed over the train of her dress. "I've never seen Sheriff Hawthorne so nervous. He's been pacing outside for an hour." Through the small window, Cordelia could see the crowd gathered in the main church. It seemed like all of Millbrook had turned out for their wedding, along with several federal marshals who'd become Jasper's friends and colleagues. Even Pearl from the Brass Lantern had come, wearing her most respectable dress and a genuine smile. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Pearl peeked around the door, her painted face glowing with excitement. 5 minutes, honey," she announced. "And I have to say, that man of yours looks good enough to eat in that fancy suit." Cordelia smiled nervously, touching the locket at her throat. "Pearl, thank you for everything you did that night at the saloon. If you hadn't helped gather witnesses, ... Pearl waved dismissively. "That Snake Grimm had it coming. Besides, any friend of yours is a friend of mine." She paused, then added more seriously, "You sure about leaving Millbrook behind? Being a marshal's wife won't be easy?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Cordelia replied honestly. "Jasper and I make a good team. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The church organ began to play, and Mrs. Henderson made final adjustments to her veil. "Time to go, dear." Cordelia took a deep breath and walked to the chapel entrance. Through the open doors, she could see Jasper waiting at the altar in his black formal suit, a silver star gleaming on his lapel. His gray eyes found hers across the crowded church, and his face lit up with such joy that her nervous butterflies instantly calmed. She had no father to walk her down the aisle, but she didn't need one. This was her choice, her future, and she walked toward it with confidence and grace. The congregation rose as she passed, their faces reflecting genuine warmth and well-dashed wishes. Doc Morrison smiled and nodded from his pew. He'd been instrumental in proving Grimm's guilt with his analysis of the poison. Mayor Cornelius dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief, still trying to make up for his role in her near execution. Even some of her former students had come, grinning and whispering excitedly about their teacher's wedding. But Cordelia only had eyes for Jasper as she approached the altar. He reached out to take her hand, and she felt that familiar electric jolt that had marked their connection from the very beginning. "You're beautiful," he whispered, as she joined him before the minister. "You're not so bad yourself, Marshal Hawthorne," she replied softly, noting how proud she felt, saying his new title. Reverend Michaels cleared his throat and began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join Jasper Hawthorne and Cordelia Fairweather in holy matrimony. ... The familiar words washed over them. But Cordelia found herself focused on Jasper's hands holding hers, strong and steady and sure. These were the hands that had untied her bonds on the gallows, that had held her steady when she was afraid, that had slipped the engagement ring on her finger. When it came time for vows, Jasper spoke first, his voice carrying clearly through. "The church. Cordelia, you came into my life when I least expected it and changed everything. You showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. You made me want to be worthy of the badge I wear and the woman I love. I promise to protect you, cherish you, and stand by your side through whatever adventures await us. With this ring, I thee wed." Tears sparkled in her eyes as he slipped the gold band onto her finger, joining it with her engagement ring. Then it was her turn. "Jasper, you saved my life, but more than that, you believed in my innocence when no one else would. You saw the person I really was beneath the accusations and fear. You taught me that real strength comes from standing up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. I promise to love you, support you, and be your partner in all things. With this ring, I thee wed." She placed a matching gold band on his finger, and he squeezed her hands gently. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado," Reverend Michaels announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Jasper cupped her face in his hands and kissed her thoroughly, sealing their union as the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. 1 year later, Cordelia stood on the porch of their small house in Denver watching. The sun set over the Rocky Mountains. Her hand rested on her growing belly, where their first child moved restlessly, as if eager to join the adventures that awaited. Jasper rode up the dusty street on his black stallion, returning from a week-long pursuit of cattle rustlers in the high country. Even from a distance, she could see the weariness in his shoulders and the stubble darkening his jaw. Being a U.S. Marshal was dangerous work, but he'd never been more fulfilled. He dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, then bounded up the porch steps to sweep her into his arms. His kiss was hungry and desperate, a man greeting the woman who'd become his anchor in an uncertain world. "How are my two favorite people?" he murmured against her hair, his large hand covering hers. On her rounded stomach, impatient, she laughed. "The baby's been kicking all day, and I've been pacing like a caged cat waiting for you to come home. Sorry I was gone so long. The rustlers led us halfway to Wyoming before we caught them." He guided her to the porch swing they'd installed last month, settling beside her with a contented sigh. "How was your week? Any word from the school board?" Cordelia smiled, pulling a letter from her apron pocket. "They approved my proposal. I'll be opening a school for children in the mining camps come spring, as the Federal Education Committee is providing funding and supplies." Jasper's face lit with pride. "That's my brilliant wife, always finding ways to help people." He paused, noticing she was wearing her mother's locket, as always. "What else happened while I was gone?" "You've got that look in your eyes." "What look?" "The one you get when you're plotting something that's either going to make me very proud or very worried." She laughed, recognizing how well he'd learned to read her moods. "Mrs. Patterson, the new widow who moved in down the street, came by yesterday asking for help. Her husband's business partner is trying to cheat her out of her inheritance." Jasper groaned playfully. "And you told her you knew just the marshal to help her, didn't you?" "I may have mentioned that my husband has experience with greedy men who prey on widows." She traced patterns on his chest through his shirt. "Besides, we make such a good team. It's the best," he agreed, echoing the words they'd spoken that night. In the jail, though you'll have to do less undercover work at saloons once the baby comes. I'm sure I can find other ways to be useful, she said with mock innocence. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. A year ago, Cordelia had been facing death on a gallows, alone and terrified. Now she was married to the man she loved, carrying his child, and building a life filled with purpose and adventure. Jasper, she said softly. Do you ever regret it? Giving up the quiet life of a small-town sheriff for all this chaos and danger? He turned to face her, his gray eyes serious in the lamplight from their windows. Never, not for a single second. His hand found the locket at her throat, his thumb tracing the familiar engravings. Your mother was right about this protecting the person who needed it most. But I think she knew something else too. What's that? That it would bring together two people who were meant to find each other? He leaned down to kiss her temple. I love you, Mrs. Hawthorne. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Together, she agreed, settling more comfortably against his side, as if summoned by their words. The baby gave a particularly strong kick that made them both laugh. Their child would grow up in a world of justice and adventure. Raised by parents who'd learned that true courage meant standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. The silver locket caught the starlight as Cordelia tilted her head back against Jasper's shoulder, and for just a moment, she could swear she felt her mother's approval in the gentle evening breeze. The sheriff had saved her from hanging. She'd given him her mother's locket. And together, they'd found something more precious than either had dared to dream, a love worth fighting for. A partnership built on trust and courage, and a future, bright with infinite possibilities, in the distance. A train whistle echoed through the mountain valleys, carrying with it the promise of new adventures and the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, Marshal Jasper Hawthorne and his brilliant wife would meet them side by side, bound together by a love that had been forged in danger and sealed with a mother's blessing.